with questions to staff. Good afternoon, everyone, and we're going to continue with item B and try to work through the fact that it was split in half. So thank you for everybody for indulging that split. What I'd like to do is, well, a couple things first. We're going to finish with this one. And then there was one person who was there for public forum and had mechanical difficulty. So when this one's over, we'll just have that 3-minute break and then go on with our agenda, just so the commissioners know. For this one on commercial Dungeness crab, it seems like there might be, and I'm asking this, I'm putting this hopefully as a question to the commission, there might be a split, so that a natural split in the way this discussion goes, where we have 2 rules and the report, and then we have other issues that have come up that people have questions about and might want to have a discussion about and recommendations. I don't know what people will come up with, but it seems like there might be a natural split where we can talk about that in 2 parts. Does that make sense to commissioners? Does that work with what you were hoping to talk about? Okay, so yours would work either way then. Okay, would you like to start off with that?
Thank you, Chairwell. So there was some testimony, Justin, about this February 1st deadline. And a couple of people said, well, we need to move it to February 1st. We have moved it to February 1st, right? I mean, yes.
Chairwell, Commissioner Labhart, yes. In our preparation of the materials, we had December 1st, 2026 as implementation date, and reading written testimony and also what we heard at some of our advisory meetings, we decided that we wouldn't be losing too much to push it back to February 1st if it helped fishermen install and get the systems up and running. So February 1st is in the proposed rules.
Are there other questions commissioners have, especially pertaining to the proposed rules? Go ahead,
I
Ann.
think we have more to talk about, but
Yes.
are you wanting to go to testimony really quick, or what do you say?
We don't need, we have finished testimony. So we're at the point where we can ask questions to staff.
So, and how were you talking about breaking it up maybe to different?
If people would like to do that, and if it makes it just more muddied, then just go ahead and ask the questions that you have, and we'll sort it out at the end when we get to the pieces on which we have motions.
I'm fine either way, as long as we can clarify how we break it down into the different issues, or so.
Then let's start with asking any questions that you think are related to the rules, if we could. There are, Justin, could you talk about the 2 that are rules and the 1 report, just to clarify?
Yes, we have 3 rules, actually. The first one is the electronic monitoring bit. The second is the experimental fishing gear permit. And then the third is that minor housekeeping rule on surface gear.
And then the report was extra, but
The report was extra informational per request from the commission.
So on that, go ahead, Commissioner Spellbrink.
Okay, thanks. Then I guess I'll first talk about the electronic monitoring. And one is I do, I think we, as a commission, that's probably some of us have some concerns about that under 26-foot entry level position for those smaller boats. And anyway, I think maybe we could discuss that some more. And I know I talked to Troy and Justin both a little bit during the break. And think that, can be, was there besides the amount of money that was for installation, then there was so much, per year, is it per month, or how is it charged that they?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wall, Commissioner Spellbrink. Depends on the vendor that's providing the service, right? These are private companies that they'll purchase units from and will provide the airtime. But we have 2 units that we know meet specifications because they were part of our pilot testing program. There's probably other ones out there that do, and we'll evaluate those as people, ask if this particular unit meets specifications. But the airtime that we have for those 2 units is between $200 to $400 per year, and those particular companies do an annual subscription, so that's what the cost is.
Yeah, and I guess, like I say, I still have a concern for those smaller boats. I'm not even sure how they're set up. So they would have the requirement for the hydraulics also, right? That would,
Yes, that's correct. They would also be required to install the
yeah, and
hydraulics.
see, and I'm not sure how, if they're using air-cooled motors to run a hydraulic pump, I just don't know how that, so if they would be shutting that motor off between pots, or I don't know if that would be a problem.
That's a good question. I mean, we would have to see what that data looked like and then kind of evaluate whether or not that is an issue for compliance. I don't think it would be ultimately if there's, a legitimate reason to be having the hydraulic pressure sensor down in between pulling strings. We would still have the location information. So, and, I don't know if that would release all the pressure on the hydraulics or not, but that'd be something we'd have to evaluate.
Yeah, anyway, I guess what I'm saying is we could look into maybe that for that section of the fleet, that I don't think there's very many of, does anyone remember how many permits there are in that under 26?
No, Commissioner Spellberg, we don't have that information. But yeah, with these units that, as Troy mentioned, have been tested in our pilot testing project, and also, from what we've learned from California and Washington, the GPS portion of the unit is very durable and can withstand weather. And so the concern, I think, that has been raised for small boats that need to mount them outside, that they might have a failure rate, and so yeah, we'd be interested to know. But as far as we know, these are rather durable, and we're not expecting to replace them very frequently.
And as far as they're working on the cellular system, is that right? These are
Correct.
I know there's areas on the coast still where there's no cell phone reception, so they just store that information, do they, and then send it in when they have reception?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then the other thing I had on the electronic monitoring was I heard, quite a few fleet, I've heard the comment that they like, the response to comment here in the attachment 5 was logbooks are a valuable source of information beyond what is provided by EM. String specific catch, bait use, pot loss, derelict pot recovery, used by managers to address a variety of issues. But I guess simplified reporting, a simplified logbook would cover that, would get you all that information without having the entire, paperwork requirement that I know I've used those logbooks in the past, and it takes a lot of work, and if the ocean's rough, you have trouble filling them out, and you're always moving pots off one end, adding them on the other end, and I can tell you a lot of that doesn't get captured in the paper logbooks because you're just got too many other things going on, so your EMS is going to be much more accurate, I guess is what I'm saying, than the paper logbook anyway, as far as on position. But anyway, I'd like to see maybe a simplified logbook that got you the information you wanted without having to go through the whole process of filling out the old logbooks. And I guess that's all I have on that.
Commissioner Spellbrink, could I just follow up on this? Because this is one that I'm not sure I understand everything I've heard yet. And it just follows up on your questions. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Since you have looks like a list. On the logbooks, I mean, several people talked about, why don't you do away with them or there was information in the report or in the staff stuff about maybe 2 years lag on something, which may be a question that doesn't even need to get asked. But on the logbooks, how should we think about those? Because a transition's never easy, but we've got the EMS and we want to go to electronic logbooks that aren't going to be required at this point. They're just voluntary. So could you just talk a little bit more about a smooth path forward here that actually works for the different fishing vessels?
Sure, Chair Wall. Yeah, I heard a lot of that testimony about logbooks, and I've been working with logbooks with the agency for the last 18 years or so. So I understand the challenges sometimes to make sure that they're accurate, and fishermen have difficulties entering the data. With this new technology for the electronic monitoring, it will allow people to use this new electronic logbook that we've been testing for a while, and we feel that it's a little bit more efficient, and we have had some positive feedback from the number of fishermen that are testing it. So part of my answer is just if fishermen are interested in moving away from paper logbooks, we have this new electronic app that is like with a push of a button, you can record your location. So there's an ease of use there that we're ready to share with the broader fleet this year. That being said, if fishermen don't elect to use this new electronic one, the electronic monitoring portion of this is not extra work. Once it's installed, there's not like additional work that fishermen will need to do. So the paper logbook, which is still in regulation, it does collect extra information that is really important for us to understand. It helps us understand which areas that fishermen are really catching the crab. What is the catch? And then for that, we also can calculate catch per unit effort, so we can identify hot spots. And the reason I bring that up is, in the future, if there are any questions about areas that we may need to do any space or depth closures or time closures, it's important for us to understand that not only where people are fishing, but how many crab they're catching. What is the value of that crab? What is going to be the impact of any potential future regulations? So we know that these potential new regulations have as much information as possible. That's why I sympathize and understand that collecting for fishermen, entering the data into paper logbooks is difficult at times, and I understand that. But at this point, we're not recommending changing the requirements about the paper logbooks, but do offer the electronic logbook as an option. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Spellberg, any more on that one? And then we have a couple here, and also Commissioner Morrison has a question. So go ahead.
Yeah, right. And also on the concerns, several fishermen brought up concerns about losing fishing time if your electronic monitoring system wasn't working. And going back again to staff comment or response to comment, it says the proposed EM rules include a mechanism for a vessel owner operator to request an EM exemption permit if there's an interruption in EM system function. So that kind of addresses that concern, right? That several of the fleet had about having to break a trip if their EM system quit working.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wall. Commissioner Spellbrink. Yeah, that is our intent with that part of the regulations. We essentially agree with that. We didn't write it hardwired in the rule because there's other things that could happen. Somebody could intentionally, for example, destroy a unit or something like that. And so we want to know the specifics of the circumstance and have a conversation with the fishermen about that, how long it's going to take to get the unit back up and running, depending on the service available and things like that. So we have it in there as this exemption permit, but that is one of the primary purposes of it, is so that people do not have to break a trip and come back to shore if the unit goes down through no fault of their own.
And I guess one other question I had was on installation of this equipment, does it take professional like electronics guy that we definitely have a shortage of on the coast? I just wondered, can it be installed by the fishermen?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It can be installed by the fishermen on many boats. Of course, different boats have different complexities, and they're kind of existing, wiring harnesses and electronics right now. But generally, yes, fishermen can self-install these, maybe with a little bit of instruction and help from the vendors, which they are more than willing to provide.
Great. Okay, thanks.
I'm not sure whose was up next, but maybe Commissioner Moldall and then Commissioner Labhart and then Commissioner Morrison.
Thanks, Chair Wall. My question centers on the economic burden of the proposed regulations. We heard a lot of understandable comments this morning about this is a cost. Could you just help us understand the fixed and the marginal costs here for the average size, or from a small vessel to a larger vessel? What's the economic burden, just so we're clear from your perspective, and what happens if we're wrong?
Yeah, thanks for the question, through the chair and Commissioner Moldall. As we mentioned, the regulations we're proposing doesn't say buy device X or Y. We have specifications, and we do know that the two devices that is in in our summary and in our presentation that we mentioned, those devices do work and meet our specifications. The pricing that we've received from the manufacturers, it's going to be somewhat less than $800. And so through the reimbursement program that we've secured through the federal funding, should be able to cover all of the equipment for each vessel that needs one to install one. So startup costs should be very minimal. The time, if a vessel needs to have an electrician or a hydraulic specialist to install the gear, of course, that will be some time that is not part of that reimbursement. But then ongoing costs will be the subscription costs, and the best information we have for an annual subscription would be $200 to $400. That being said, one thing I don't think has really been brought up is that for this vessel monitoring system that we're proposing, it's only during the time that a vessel is actively crabbing, which is different from other vessel monitoring systems, which require them to be on 24/7, no matter what they're fishing for. So a vessel that fishes 3 months of the season only needs to have the vessel up, or the service going for those 3 months. So if we're looking at $25 to $50 a month, the annual costs are going to be considerably less. I don't have accurate information to know how many years we expect to get out of the GPS or the hydraulic pressure sensors, but they're kind of marine rated, if you will, and they hopefully will last long enough that replacement would be reasonable.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Labhart.
Thank you, Chair Wall. It's on the same subject. It appears that both sides are supportive and recommending funding for the electronic monitoring, except the small boat guys. I lean toward potentially a small boat exemption. And the reason that I do is, if I heard the testimony correct, is, these are open boats. I fully realize that it's a marine hardened, but open boats like dories are going out into waves, and the transom is fairly small on most of these boats. We're not talking a big giant 40-footer here. We're talking less than a 26-foot boat. I understand there's, I don't know how many permits there are, but if the testimony was correct, there's only 4 that are out there that are working. And they're running on a shirt sleeve, financial part right now. At least that's the way I heard the testimony, is they're not making a lot of money. It's not a do or die program for them, because they're doing other kinds of fishing, salmon, bottom fish, those kind of things. And so, in my opinion, I think we can afford to give a bone here to at least the small guys that are out there that are just barely making it. I shouldn't say barely making it. They wouldn't be fishing if they weren't making it, but and maybe they're fishing anyway. But we still have the paper logbooks for them. They're still got to comply with that. And while we're trying to transition to that, maybe we could go for a while and see if the electronics working pretty good, and maybe a year or two would come back and revisit it for the small boats and say, the big guys are doing good. There seems to be good. We think we can do it on dory boats. But I don't know. I'd like to see us at least the commission explore a small boat exemption for boats under 26 feet and see if there's any kind of consensus on that. I just think there's a potential there, and I don't think the large commercial guys would be against it. I don't think the Oceana folks would say, oh, my Lord, we gotta have everything here. We gotta have all of this for 4 boats, you know. I just think there's a potential for having some discussion about that.
Can I put a question mark at the end of that so that they can comment? Go ahead, if you have a comment.
Chair Wall, Commissioner Labhart, it's a decision for you to make if there are vessels that you don't feel should be should be held to the regulations. It would I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me about if you mentioned 26 feet, how many vessels that actually is, and how many how much of the fishing effort that is. So that's not something I can really help inform that decision for you to make.
Commissioner Spellbrink, and then we're going to go to our commissioners online.
Okay, yeah, I guess I would kind of concur with that, because the other thing is, I think all those smaller boats are fishing shallow water. So there would be less, I mean, they're just basically fishing the beach in those inside crab grounds because to start with, I don't think they have the capacity to haul very much line. So I guess I think they're inside 3 miles pretty much most of the time.
Chair Wall, Commissioner Spellbrink, that is something we could analyze with our existing logbook data, again, showing the value of our logbook data, to demonstrate where and how much gear is being used by vessels under 26 feet. Again, not prepared to have share that information right now. Just don't have it at my fingertips. But lines in the water and is entanglement risk, and so and gear gets lost, and so I know that we're talking about whether or not they install electronics, but we don't have exemptions from for certain vessels from our other regulations. It's just pure awareness.
And then, I mean, maybe we could look into this, I guess, because the possibility of an exemption for boats under 26 feet to fish, and and there again, like I say, they would be. I doubt if any of them fish much over 15 fathoms, probably on the beach, just because of the ability to haul that much gear and that much with much line.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Commissioner Spellbrink. The staff have just informed me that we have about 30 vessels that are 26 feet and less.
Oh, more than 4. Yeah, okay. And
yeah, so that's less than 10%, but it's of the fleet. But yeah, more than So there's over 400 permits, and there's over 300 active permits each season. So 30 vessels would be roughly 10%. Again, just kind of doing some quick math in my head.
go ahead, Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde.
I guess just a quick question. How many of those are the dory boats?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde, just based on the size, it's hard to say that how many of them are actual dory boats fishing off the beach. If that's the question, dory boats is a style of boat. It's not part of the permit. And so there could be boats that are less than 26 feet that may not meet the definition of a dory. Some boats out of Port Orford are pretty small, but wouldn't necessarily call them dories. But most of the vessels that we see are 22, 23 feet. Those likely be dories. But I just also want to add, just reiterate too that these the electronic monitoring, like the GPS unit parts of this, they're durable. So I know the question was more about cost, and so that really is about what is the profit margin on boats, and I'm sure there's larger boats, the larger than 26 feet, that also have a small profit margin too. So I'm just thinking about is it in my own mind, my opinion here is it fair to exempt a certain sector of the fleet based on the size of their boat, when really what we're talking about is whether or not they're making a profitable in the fishery, and they can afford some new hardware on their vessel. So it's and we're making the assumption that all boats less than 26 feet are not making much profit and couldn't afford these units. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily true.
Could we, thank you. And I know these are getting down to nuanced questions,
Sure.
but it's useful to get your perspective on them. Could we go to, I think Commissioner Hall DeFreeze has a question, as well as Commissioner Morrison. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My questions have been similar to the ones kind of already posed. I think maybe more of a statement or thinking about all of the comments about being creative, thinking creatively about how this is implemented. And your comment just kind of like made me think again, so I kind of lost my train of thought. But I guess thinking long term, you mentioned that long term you were thinking of potentially some funding availability to implement this as well, right? Like right now we have the $800 for initial setup fee. And then I think you also mentioned that there was potential to offset some of the annual subscription fees, or there's thought that maybe you could fundraise for that. I might be confounding that with another area that you thought there might be funds available, but you hadn't secured yet. Can you talk about that? And I'm just curious also with some of the testimony that was provided, do you see a viable path forward where there could be a long-term fund where we're gathering money from maybe other groups who are interested in welfare and would be supportive of this type of technology, that they could continue to pay some offset funds for subscription, for instance?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Hall DeFreeze, thank you for the question. Right now, what are the money available that we've been talking about, this reimbursement, we're being cautious about overcommitting. We do know that we can help with the hardware, and if we don't know what the actual total amount that we would in terms of the total amount of reimbursements that we will see. But if we have money available, yes, we could help with the annual airtime as funds are available. We're just cautious about overcommitting some of this money. In terms of helping set up another fund, and be happy to have conversations with outside groups that would be interested in helping fund electronic monitoring and other aspects that we're bringing to this commission. Right now, we work closely with members of various different groups that are part of our advisory committee, and they contribute a lot to our decision making, and but I can't speak for them in terms of what they'd be able to commit.
Thank you. Anything else, Commissioner Hall DeFreeze? Commissioner Morrison?
Yeah, thank you. And I wasn't intending to necessarily address or talk about this proposed idea of a small boat exemption, but maybe I'll just quickly weigh in on that since we're talking about it. I think it's worth looking at this. And the comment was made, sorry, just a moment ago about, it's kind of a question about economic burden and whether it's greater or lesser on different sizes of vessels. But I think that it's also equally about the entanglement risk. And for me, it would be helpful to weigh that question of a small boat exemption if we were to look at the point of Commissioner Spellbrink about are they closer into shore, and so there's a reduced entanglement risk. It would also be helpful to know, are they fishing more in late season or early season? Again, because that kind of affects what the level of entanglement risk is. So I think there's some additional info there that would be helpful if we're really going to look at the potential of a small boat exemption. But my question actually has more to do with the experimental fishing gear permit. So if I could ask that, but before I even get into that, I want to just take a moment to say thank you to everyone in the department who's been working on this issue. It's really evident, how much you all have put into public engagement in this. And that's really appreciated. In my short time on the commission here, I've seen over and over again in the department a real focus on ensuring that affected communities are brought into these conversations, as well as other interested parties, and that focus on public engagement is really valuable. And I value the fact that you're doing it. So thank you to that, and thank you to all the folks who've been part of that through groups like the Entanglement Advisory Committee and the Dungeness Crab Advisory Commission and the Dungeness Crab Commission. others out there, those who made comment today, those who showed up at public meetings previously about potential for experimental fishing gear. So related to that, as we look forward, assuming we're going to move forward with this experimental fish gear permit program, what would you envision the level of how you would engage public further in these next few months before spring of next year on developing the rules, the terms and conditions around the experimental fish gear program? Because we've heard some great comments from folks. We had great written comments from folks about important considerations. And I think having their voices continue to be part of this process would be valuable. So I'll just kind of ask, what would you envision in engagement going forward?
Thank you, Chair Wall. Commissioner Morrison, that's a great question and one we put a little bit of thought into. First, I want to just start by saying that we did leave, some flexibility for ourselves in that rule because we don't want to be having to come back to the commission every time we need to bump up the number of boats that can participate or something. If you put that in rule, right, we'd have to come back to have a rule change if we did that. But we do have a standing Oregon Entanglement Advisory Committee, and I think that would be a great venue to have these discussions. So, potentially meeting with them sometime this fall before we issue permits next spring and have some of these conversations about, what are the criteria going to be and what information do we need to collect to make sure that we're able to evaluate those criteria, and then follow-up meetings with that same group, on the data that's been collected, the results so far, and that would be kind of the transparency side of it.
Great,
quick
that sounds really
follow-up.
helpful. Sorry, go ahead, please go ahead.
A quick follow-up on that question. Would that include criteria for the tests? There were several people that talked about that.
So I think there's kind of two different types of criteria we're talking about. One would be criteria for issuing the permits, and then the criteria for eventual authorization, did the test work essentially? And I think
Yeah.
we could use that group to talk about both things.
Thank you. That helps. Sorry to interrupt you, Commissioner Morrison. Were there more questions that you had? We have one quick follow-up from Commissioner Laphart, and then I have one, and then we'll.
Yep, thank you, Chair Wall. So it's following up on Commissioner Morrison's comment. So have we had any entanglements from dory boats?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Labhart, I don't think we have any information available whether or not gear
Okay.
from dory boats has been involved in an entanglement. So I'll say that we
Is there-
don't. We do follow up when we do hear about an entanglement, and if we do know the name of the vessel, if there's a buoy tag, generally, and we do follow up investigations. And in my recollection of the ones in the last several years, I don't know if there has been one from a small 26-foot boat. That being said, like a derelict gear is contributing to entanglements, and I'm probably true that most every permit has lost gear at one point, and it does happen every year. And I think that probably safe to say that some dories lose gear too. They may be fishing in shallower waters generally than some of the larger vessels, but yeah, I don't. There, as we mentioned in our presentation, there's been 20 entanglements over the last dozen so many years, and there's just very few data points, and we try to investigate as much as we can. Where was the gear set? What time it is, but generally it's a wide range and a wide depth range, because vessels aren't, when we get back to a captain and say, unfortunately your gear was involved in entanglement, where did you set this one pot? And they say, well, it was sometime between December and March in maybe 10 to 50 fathoms. And so, the data we get from entanglements doesn't, there's no silver bullet that says, this is what leads to entanglements. So generally we feel that, every line in the water has a potential risk of entanglement.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Vice Chair, and then Commissioner Spellbrink.
Okay, I have just a couple different thoughts. First of all, just, as it relates to the conservation plan and NOAA fisheries, can you just give me a brief, where are we with that again?
Thank you, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde. So our conservation plan, our proposed conservation plan was submitted to NOAA Fisheries at the beginning of June, and it's now going through what they call their full team review. So this is hopefully the final round of review that it'll go through that includes their ITP team as well as Section 7 biologists and others. So we're hoping to hear back on that with their feedback soon. And at that point, we would start to apply that feedback. And our goal is to be able to submit that formally by the end of the year.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so we're finally rolling on that. Thank God.
I would say we've been rolling for a
You
number of
guys
years.
but
Yeah.
That we needed a little WD-40 on the federal level, right? To like,
Sure.
let's get this thing moving,
Yeah.
guys.
And
Okay,
I would
Yeah.
just temper expectations, the not just this review that we're going through, but what we're really working towards is the incidental take permit. And that still could be, it's farther down the horizon. So that should be, I don't have a timeline on that, but that's our ultimate what we're working for.
okay,
Mhm.
because I think we just keep moving on this and we keep trying to do a little better here and we keep raising our bar and then that process is going and we keep coming around the horn on this. Okay, so I want to make just an observation, which is, it's been a couple of years now that the department and other stakeholders started to bring up these ideas of alternative gear. And I think there's an impatience out there of, why haven't we done this, that, and the other yesterday? But I think there has been just a steady march forward on this front in a really positive, sustainable, restrained, responsible way. And so I hope we continue to do that so that there is the possibility, now if we vote on this today, we're taking another step towards that gear. We're testing those waters in ways that don't hurt fishermen, don't hurt, that we just move forward. I think sometimes we think nothing is happening, and there are definitely things happening. I did feel like we heard testimony about this electronic monitoring and the burden to it, but what I was actually surprised is I felt like there was a pretty good consensus between both the fleet and the interest groups to get her done, move forward on this. I did have concerns also when I was hearing that about, if it was damaged by water because your boat's too small or whatever. And I think we've kind of went through that a little. So I'm kind of leaning to let's get this in place because I think, and I might be wrong on this, but I think that this is a piece that helps keep us all safe and have more just understanding in the future to keep moving forward, keep moving that ball, keep. So I'm leaning towards we just get her done with that. And what else is there? I think that's it. I just want to leave, I'd like to leave this on a positive note. I think people are concerned in the fleet about entanglement. I think there are steps being taken by Oregon. I think we've got the gears moving at the federal level on moving towards incidental take, and we could all leave here feeling like everything isn't enough, but incrementally over time, we keep gaining ground. That's my thought.
Mr. Spellbrook, and then I'm going to take a turn.
Thank you, Chair Wall. I guess I had maybe a proposal for the small boat exemption, just for consideration by the commission here, and that would be relief for the under 26-foot crab boats that are fishing inside of 25 fathoms, which is the area that is I guess, of of less concern for any whale entanglements. And I think you would find that would separate the serious boats, the guy, the dories, I don't think are really have the capability of fishing outside 25 fathoms. Uh, and any of the boats that would fit into that category that are fish out of the ports like Newport would all be fishing deeper than 25 fathoms. They wouldn't stay inside that. I think the dories, most of those guys fish pretty shallow because they've got to get out, get the gear up, and get back in all in good weather. And I think that would cover it. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that proposal out for consideration.
Thank you.
And maybe just have staff look at the possibility of that and come back to us.
Okay. Let me ask a couple questions just because I have a few to ask, and mine mostly go to what we just got onto, which is the conservation plan. I go back to what Commissioner Morrison said about it's more about the entanglements, and that's sort of at the end of the day what we're trying to solve here. So it's sort of the frame for me. The questions I have on the conservation plan, several of the comments were about 67 whales, and why is that? If we're trying to reduce the entanglements, why are we at 67 as the number we're asking for rather than trying to bring it down? And I wonder if you have any comments on that, or if it's something that we need to ask you to come back in a few months to talk about.
Chair Wall, yeah, our conservation plan lays out the method about where we came up with those numbers, and it's looking at the recent entanglement record. It's looking at also that, for the past 5 years, we've made, significant progress towards reducing risk. And we've all of the regulations that we reviewed and that we have in place now are part of the conservation plan. It's part of the work. And so so there's where we came up with the estimated numbers and what our request is. It's really up to NOAA Fisheries to evaluate that in terms about whether our strategies are meet the standards. And we do, so coupled with that too, there's also, as we talked about a number of times too, the adaptive management, that if our rates are entanglements in the future show that we're not going to be under, and the goal is to keep it well under there as much as we possibly can. Those are not numbers that we are striving for, as you heard from much of the testimony, both from fishermen and from the and advocate groups, that no one wants to see entanglements, and so ultimately the goal is to reduce those as much as possible. But trying to balance the fishing opportunity and the value of the commercial crab fishery, that's kind of where we struck a balance, and felt like this was a number that can that is allows the fishing with the restricted regulations that we have in place now, allows the fishing industry to continue, and then also is at a number that allows the whale populations to recover.
Thank you. Along those lines, one of the other things that got mentioned several times was the undiscovered ones. Is there a way to even think about that within the context of our conservation plan? If the numbers are a lot more, if it's multiples, or maybe not 5 times, but 3 times as many, it's still worth thinking about. So can you frame that a little bit?
Yeah, Chair Wall, thank you for the question. That is a question that we are working with NOAA Fisheries on and trying to understand more about that research. And it was mentioned a number of times in testimony. The research is still preliminary, and so it has not been incorporated into our existing conservation plan. That's true. To try to get a better idea of this research, we've been in touch with the researchers that are doing that work, and so this this work involves the number of times a whale might be sighted and resighted, again with more entanglements. There are a lot of eyes on the water, to see these whales when there is an entanglement, and so we're trying to understand more about this research, and we have meetings set up in this fall to work directly with the researchers that are doing that, so we can understand more about what their assumptions are, what are the model inputs, And so we're trying to get a better grasp on that. So right now, since that research is not published and available to be incorporated and say provide it to you in terms of future, but when and if it does, when and whatever those actual rates are and when those are finalized, we'll factor those into regulations in the future, if needed.
I have one more, and it's in another area, and this one, the conditions are changing, and you're having to deal with that, which must make your head spin at times. So in terms of, we've analyzed things and put certain risk reduction restrictions later in the year, and we've thought about moving them forward. How confident are we, or are we looking at this and it's something that we might know more about within a year, that we have the risk reduction, that we know where the maximum overlap is, because that's what we're really aiming for, if you will, is trying to find where are those lines most often going to run into whales. So could you say a little bit about how confident we are, or what else we're looking at to know if we have the time of maximum overlap?
Chair Wall, thank you. Great question. You're right. Yes, the information that we had available 5 years ago, and that led to the late season measures. A lot of that work is, still holds true, but since then there's been more and more annual surveys of whales off Oregon. Some of those surveys we're helping fund. We're also helping fund some of the research that is looking at that overlap. So the next round of incorporating more rounds of surveys and more fishing data too, to figure out more of that overlap. And I might turn to Troy if there's any more about this research with OSU that you'd like to share.
Sure. Thank you, Justin. And Chair Wall, thanks for the question. So there's we are continuing to do surveys, and we're partner with OSU on doing the analysis to look at those. And there are some published papers that have been referenced a lot with the maximum overlap probably happening sometime in April. The newest research, the picture is just more complex than that. It's regional. There's different high peaks of overlap in different areas of the coast. And so the next step that we're working on, those papers are going to be coming out relatively soon, probably within, 6 months or so. And then we're also working on a project with OSU now, the next step of doing these management scenario evaluations. So we can hypothetically say, what if we moved the line to 30 fathoms, or what if we moved the line to 50 fathoms? What if we had a 25% reduction instead of a 20% reduction? How does that change the risk? And be able to really look at that balance and see those trade-offs, and have it transparent. Everybody will see what those trade-offs are. So have a lot of hope that work will come to fruition and provide us some good tools for kind of evaluating those questions in the future.
Just to summarize where I think we are right this minute is we have the three, thank you for the correction, so I don't call it two, 3 rules. And we have the small boat question that's attached to those. And we have 4 areas that I have heard you talk about. You're making some serious headway. We're even helping shape the research to try to answer these questions on the undiscovered ones, on the maximum overlap, and are we getting the risk reduction aimed at where the maximum is? And these questions that people keep raising about, is 25% better or 20% better, and should it be early or should it be late, and should we move the line? It seems that's a fairly clear break. We have the questions today, we have the small boat question attached to the 3 today, and we have these others that we probably should hear from you about in, say, 6 months or a year, though some of us won't be here at that point. We still want to hear. We'll be watching. But that's how they break out for me right now. I wonder if that's even remotely helpful to people to think about. We have the rules with the small boat piece question. And then we have, could we ask that you come back in a year with, or in 6 months, whichever works, depending on how those research pieces go, because those are really tied to the conservation plan and how that's going to be implemented and that sort of thing. To make any sense? too late in the afternoon to garble? And Commissioner Labhart, well, is there anything that anybody would want to shape differently? Because we need to get to the motion. So, Commissioner Labhart, did you have? Okay, then anything on the one I just said, because otherwise I'm going to sort of roll with that. Okay, go with your general.
Can I speak to?
Yes, sure.
I would just, in terms of kind of a coming back timeline, in fairness to the program folks, I just want to recognize that regardless of what you do with the small boats, we will be implementing the new EM stuff with the fleet with a very, ambitious timeline. We are also going to be standing up the experimental permit program with an ambitious timeline and criteria to develop. And we still are working through all the details of the draft conservation plan. So 6 months, I would just ask for, maybe we could just make the commitment that we will come back to you as soon, and we can keep working with you, Chair Wall, but just like, they got a lot on their plate. I don't think I would be doing my job if I didn't point that out to you, so.
No, that's fair, and that's why you're the director. And I appreciate that you step in with those kinds of notes. So, Bob, go ahead. You should pay her.
Entanglements. And I'm glad we're going to do more research on that, because the reality is, I think that's an overestimate, the 5 or, that go unobserved. Because I mean, on any given day all summer long that the weather's decent, there's probably 1,000 recreational boats on the ocean. No matter what the weather is, there's probably a couple hundred commercial boats on the ocean. And I think that, there's not too much anymore on the ocean that goes unobserved. And that being said, though, I think we ought to have, and I think I brought this up once before, and that is at all our ports facilities, especially on the recreational side and probably the commercial side too, we ought to have posters with reporting information, say report entanglements and a reporting phone number. And so let's get the word out, because there may be observed entanglements that are going unreported, because we have all these eyes on the ocean. Let's make sure that all the ports have a little poster at each, dock going down that's with the reporting information, what you need, where you saw it. Everybody has electronics on their boat now, that long, all that. So let's use all the eyes that are on the ocean. So that would be a suggestion I would say that is necessary to make sure we get everything that is observed reported. And then going back to what your concern was on the 61 whales, or 67, I think, if you counted the other besides humpbacks, I think that was over 15 years. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Yeah, so that's about the average we've been entangling recently, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And to address that, I mean, the reason we've seen entanglements increase, I believe, that it isn't because we're entangling more whales, like there's a set population, we're entangling more of them every year. It's that population that's been increasing every year. And so we're going to have more interactions, because, I mean, if I go back to this letter from National Marine Fisheries Service in 2022, they said in 2020, the population of humpbacks of the northern distinct population was 4,800 whales, and they were increasing at a rate of approximately 7 to 8% a year. So, I mean, that population of humpbacks, if that's true, is, I haven't done the math, but it's probably 6,000 animals or something like that anyway. So I believe we can reduce our entanglement risk and still entangle, like it has been the last few years. We're entangling, maybe entanglements have increased, but that's because of the increased population. It's not, I saw some, in the testimony where it said entanglements are the primary threat to recovery, was some of the, I copied that down from some of the testimony. And I don't believe that it's a primary threat to recovery. The recovery is here. is a threat because we have the recovery, we have more whales, and so we are gonna, we're gonna have interactions with a few more whales because we have more whales. It's really, it's a success story on one hand. So, and I think we need to actually make sure that that's out in the public record too, that we're responding to something that happens due to a success story overall.
Thank you. And I think we heard from staff that they're still looking at that to try to make, I mean, that would be great if we knew that it's all because of a success story, but we also have increasing entanglements. So I appreciate the way you have gone about this to continue working on those. Let's go to Commissioner Labhart, and then we're going to look for a motion.
Okay, it's kind of following up on what Commissioner Hatfield Hyde said, but in quite a bit more detail. So before we get to a motion or motions, I just, 4 of us have been on this commission for 7 years. So the question I ask myself is this: over time, what has this commission done? And this is based on some of the press I see on TV about whale entanglements and what some people testified today. So I feel obligated to put this on the record. I ask myself this: over time, what has this commission done to reduce whale entanglements while protecting Oregon's valuable commercial fishing industry? The record shows we are making concerted effort to do so. This commission has used adaptive management to reduce whale entanglements through lost gear recovery, gear identification, seasonal restrictions, depth limits, and monitoring tools, while weighing those actions against the economic importance of our Oregon's commercial crabbing fishery. The question before us is not whether whale entanglements matter. They do. It's whether this commission has responded appropriately with these actions. The science and our understanding of entanglement risks have evolved. I'm going to summarize by looking back over the last 12 years. The record shows a progressive, adaptive approach. We have taken increasingly direct action on whale entanglements while working to protect the economic viability of Oregon's commercial crab fishery. 2014 to 2016, we began addressing one of the most obvious sources of risk: lost and abandoned crab gear. We established a program to recover abandoned and lost crab pots. We focused on removing pots and lines that could continue to entangle whales after the fishing season. We have recovered a significant number of pots each year. 2019, as we learned more, the focus shifted to where entanglements were occurring and whose gear was involved. The Commission and the Department established a formal whale entanglement working group involving industry and partners. We improved the gear identification and record keeping. We adopted permanent requirements for gear marking, buoy color registration, and electronic fish tickets. We developed voluntary best fishing practices. The goal was to build a stronger scientific and management foundation before imposing broader fisheries restrictions. 2020, we began directing reduced whale entanglement gear overlap. As the science developed, we moved from information gathering to reducing direct overlap between whales and crab gear. We used temporary rules to test those measures before deciding whether to make broader, longer-term changes. Late season beginning May 1st, 20% pot limit reduction on ocean Dungeness crab permits, 40-fathom depth restrictions, no crabbing outside of 40 fathoms, requirements for additional late season buoy tag, elimination of standard replacement tags, allowance for up to 10% of the pot limit, elimination of a 2-week postseason gear cleanup period. Gear must be removed by August 14th when the fishery ends. Increased season opening flexibility to minimize delay and peak harvest effort. Reduction of meat yield criteria for opening the season south of Cascade Head. Requirement for maintenance of taut lines. Monitoring measures such as prohibition of West Coast fishery line markings. The intent was to reduce fishing effort where and when whales were more likely to encounter crab gear. 2023, rather than allowing these measures to expire, the Commission made them permanent. We removed the sunset on the 20% pot limit, made 40-fathom depth restrictions permanent, made the late season buoy tag permanent, added limits on the surface gear, created incentives to recover crab from derelict pots, and improve lost gear recovery. This was important. The Commission continued meaningful restrictions, even though the evidence had not shown that every measure produced a statistical measure reduction in entanglements. 2024, we continued improving our ability to understand and respond to entanglements. monitoring measures implemented to improve gear identification and accountability, requirement for line marking, expanded prohibition of other West Coast fishery line markings for all recreation and commercial fishing gear fisheries, electronic monitoring, closed area transit. The purpose was accountability and better information, identifying gear involved in entanglements and improving future management decisions. 2025, the situation became more concerning. ODF&W issued advisories asking fishermen to avoid areas where whales were feeding or traveling. Oregon recorded 4 confirmed humpback whale entanglements attributed to Oregon crab gear, the highest annual total at that time. ODF&W staff began evaluating additional regulatory actions. This was important. When the evidence changed, the department began evaluating additional measures. What does the science tell us about the effectiveness? Here, we need to be especially honest. These existing measures have not solved the entanglement problem. There is at least one encouraging finding, though. Since the late season buoy tag requirement began in 2020, no crab gear entanglements have been attributed to gear containing that tag. That does not prove the measure eliminated risk, but it deserves consideration as we evaluate additional actions. 2026, responding to the new science. This is what Troy was talking about. In 2026, research from 2023 found that entanglement risk exposure increases in April. That research, along with a high number of entanglements in 2026, led to a temporary rule for the 2025-26 season, moving late season risk reduction measures from May 1st to April 1st, including a 20% pot limit reduction, 40-fathom depth restriction, and late season buoy tag requirement. Since then, as Troy said, new unpublished OSU research using additional whale distribution and fishing data points to the north-south difference in humpback timing off of Oregon. Rather than making April 1st permanent with its high social economic costs, the department has kept the May 1st start date, or proposing to keep the May 1st start date, while incorporating new research into future adaptive management decisions. That is what adaptive management should do: learn from new information and adjust accordingly. That leads to the next question: what do we do now? The department is proposing 6 additional approaches: electronic fish monitoring requirements, voluntary electronic logbooks, experimental testing of pop-up ropeless and long line gear, potential new season opening criteria, a 5-year review of existing measures, and continuing to develop a conservation plan with an incidental take permit with NOAA. What does the record show? When we step back and look at the entire period, the progression is clear. We removed lost crab gear, improved accountability, reduced fishing effort, restricted fish depth, added seasonal gear restrictions, made key measurements permanent, improved line identification, moved restrictions earlier when science supported it, and began evaluating new technologies and management tools. This is not a commission that has stood still. It is a commission that has adjusted its approach as science, experience, and circumstances have changed. This does not mean we should be satisfied with where we are. 4 entanglements in 2025 are definitely concerning. Every entanglement matters, and we have a responsibility to continue looking for ways to reduce that risk. But we must recognize that Oregon's commercial crab fishery supports fishermen, families, coastal communities, processors, and business. Our job is to find the right balance. The evidence does not demonstrate that our existing measures have solved the problem, but the record also does not support the conclusion that this commission has failed to act or has ignored the science. Quite the opposite. We have acted repeatedly, evaluated what we've learned, and adjusted our management approach. Bottom line, the real policy question before us today is not simply whether we should do more. It is whether the recent increase in entanglement justifies moving beyond our current adaptive management approach and imposing the more restrictive measures that staff are proposing today. That is a serious question, and I believe it deserves to be answered with the same approach we have followed since 2014. Follow the science. Learn from experience, protect whales, protect Oregon's commercial fishing industry, continue to adapt. In my view, the staff recommendations proposed today meet that standard we have set and allow for us to keep adapting as we learn more. And except for maybe the discussion about the small boats within 25 fathoms. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Labhart. Commissioner Morrison, and then we'll look for a motion.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm hesitant to say anything after Commissioner Labhart's great summation of what's been happening over the last few years. Thank you for that, Commissioner Labhart. I think that's really, really helpful. As we're looking to go towards a motion, I guess I just have one more question. And we've just had the benefit of seeing the results of this sort of 5-year review of recent actions taken to try and minimize entanglements. And one of the great things I think about electronic monitoring and about the experimental fish gear permit program is that they will provide us data, really valuable data. And I guess one question that I have, maybe coming back to your point, Chair Wall, about when will we kind of look next at what that data shows us, is do we have, I guess I'd like to hear from the department, what a reasonable time is to come back again and look at what we've learned from the data that will be gathered through electronic monitoring and the experimental fish gear permit program. Is 3 years reasonable? I guess I'm just looking to know, when will we see the benefit? You said, Commissioner Labhart, follow the science. This will provide us a lot of good science. When can we anticipate being able to look at the results of that?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wall, Commissioner Morrison. As we mentioned, our Entanglement Advisory Committee is a body that we would first consult after even the first season. So some preliminary results. I don't expect that we would have enough information until maybe 2 years of using alternative gears, that we would have enough information maybe to formulate future recommendations. So that's been what we've been talking about is maybe 2 years, but again, not a firm number, just because it depends on participation. In a perfect world, we would have vessels of all sizes and fishing in all areas, from north to south. So the environmental conditions, which was a big part of concerns that we heard from our advisory committee, so we can have test the gear in different areas, and that other, as I mentioned too, the small boats versus large boats. So if we had that kind of representation, at minimum 2 years, but maybe 3.
Thanks,
Before
that's helpful.
future-
I think 2 to 3
future
years is really helpful. And I'll just a quick follow-up comment on your point about getting a variety of different locations and boat sizes involved in the EFGP is really would be great. And I think earlier you mentioned maybe 7 or 8 permits, and I guess from my perspective, it'd be nice to see that be a little bit larger. I know there's staff time and costs in terms of how many permits you would issue, but again, the more data, the better, to help us to evaluate the effectiveness and as others have said, the safety of these other gear potentials. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we're at the point where we should look at a motion on the rules that are recommended to us. Is anybody ready to make a motion? Go ahead, Commissioner Moldau.
Yes. I move to adopt the rule amendments set forth in attachment 3 effective upon filing, except OAR 635-004-0446, which shall be effective February 1st, 2027.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the rule amendment set forth in attachment 3 as was just read into the record. Let's do a voice vote on this, if you will, Michelle.
Labhart,
Yes.
Spellbring,
Yes.
Hall DeFreeze,
Yes.
Modal,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Hatfield Hyde,
Yes.
Wall.
I'm voting yes on this one. I would like a little bit of a discussion if we could at some point on when things come back, but on this part, I'm voting yes. With great thanks to staff for enduring this. I think then we can thank you so much and end this discussion and move on to the next one. So thank you all. It's an immense amount of work.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners, for the discussion and for staying with it. And to everyone in the room who testified, Great, thanks. Appreciate your help. Commissioners, we have one public forum item and we will keep it absolutely 3 minutes and then we're going to move on to Exhibit C. So we'll look at the trap check limits. Michelle, do we have the person on for public forum? Go- Go ahead. Is Dave Moskowitz on? Go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, and you'll have 3 minutes and then we have quite a bit to do this afternoon, so we're going to stick with that.
Okay, very good. I really appreciate the great effort of the commission on that issue. I just listened to the whole thing and learned a lot that I didn't know beforehand. But I also want to say appreciation to the ODFW staff that were recognized today and for your service. Appreciate the public forum opportunity for be able to speak with you directly is always valuable and really appreciate it. I'm going to send you a memo and cut my remarks as short as possible because it's a long day and a Friday. But the reason for coming to you is my concern about wild steelhead in the Columbia Basin particularly, but it extends to places like the North Umpqua and other rivers as well on the coast. But I'm a steelhead angler. That's what I do. I organize my life around it. My family and I spend a lot of time thinking about it, enjoying the rivers where they live and come back to, and just occasionally rewarded with the opportunity to hold a wild steelhead. It's who I am. It's the main thing I do, and the Deschutes is my home water. I know that most of you know. In the past, I've been leading the charge to close it when the runs are low. It's not a recovery strategy, but it's the one tool in the toolbox we have to prevent individual fish from being killed when the run is low. And so this year is a repeat to 2021. It's very sad. I sense a lack of urgency and concern about steelhead in the Columbia. And it's a 3-state issue, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. I would urge the commission, like you did to try to figure out the gillnet situation in the lower Columbia with Washington. I would love to see you lead the creation of a compact with the other 2 states to discuss steelhead conservation so that we aren't left putting anglers off the river. There's so many ways that we can help recover steelhead, conserve them, and there's a 2009 recovery plan that's after they were listed. There's so many undone conservation promises, and we need to re-energize that. I said I was going to cut my testimony down. I'm winding down to under 50 seconds. You'll see the testimony. Hopefully, you'll get it through the email. I would really like to see some cooperative conservation in that regard. And thank you very much for providing this opportunity to me. And I hope you all travel safely after the meeting's over.
Go ahead, whenever you're ready, Brian.
Okay, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, members of the commission, Director Colbert. For the record, I'm Brian Wolfer. I'm the Wildlife Division Deputy Administrator. Quick question, Michelle, do I advance the slides myself? Thank you. So I'm here today to present to you a proposal that would establish trap check requirements when traps are used to trap bears and cougars, or to take bears and cougars that are causing damage, or a public nuisance, or a public safety health risk. So you might be thinking, what do you mean trapping bears and cougars? Aren't those a game mammal? Aren't those the species that we hunt and are not trapped? It's important to set a little bit of background here. Yes, bears and cougars are classified as game mammals in the statutes. And so we have established hunting seasons for those species. So we have license requirements, tag requirements for recreational harvest in those seasons, as well as weapons restrictions, check-in requirements. And we have certain methods that are prohibited. Use of dogs is prohibited, use of traps is prohibited. But in this case today, we're talking about response to damage. And response to damage falls into some separate areas of statute. And so there are opportunities for landowners to take bear and cougar outside the hunting seasons when they have damage, nuisance, and their safety issues. It's great when hunting seasons can be a tool to use, but then there's also options when hunting seasons are not, and that's what we're talking about today. You might be wondering, what are some of the types of conflict? I use the term damage and nuisance, and you might be wondering, well, what do we see with that? What's that mean here in Oregon? And so some of the things that we see in Oregon when it comes to conflict with bears and cougars, with bears in particular, through public comment and reading some of the comment, you probably heard a little bit about timber damage or tree peeling. And what that is we do see bears, especially in the spring and summertime, they will peel the bark off of trees, especially Douglas fir, sometimes cedar, to get to that cambium layer underneath. And when they do that, essentially they're girdling that tree and can cause the death of that tree. It doesn't happen everywhere. It happens typically in trees that are 25 to 35 years old, maybe 40 years old. So it's in that place where the trees aren't mature. When it's happening on private timberlands, that landowner's got 30 years invested in those trees and now isn't able to harvest them without damaging the healthy trees in the stand. Can't replace them with new trees because they're not going to grow to harvestable age before the rest of the stands mature. And so you have like some long-term economic costs for those managers. But we also see conflict sometimes with commercial agriculture, especially orchards. We might see bears in fruit orchards or in nut orchards. For much of my career as a field biologist, I've had many conversations with orchardists about how nice it would be if the bear would just take the fallen fruit and the fallen nuts, but it's when they get up in the tree and they're breaking limbs that's having effect on next year's production and the year after's production by damaging that tree structure and having lasting damage. And so we do see that also. And that falls in that damage. And damage is loss or harm inflicted on land, livestock, agricultural crop, forest crop. Not necessarily commercial, but tends to have a pretty commercial bent to it. Then we have things like gardens, residential fruit trees, where we might have some of those same issues, but it's not in a commercial scale. And so that tends to fall into nuisance, which is, from a statute definition, loss or harm inflicted on gardens, landscaping, structures, vehicles, those sorts of things. And so there's a little bit of a commercial residential, but both entail loss or harm. We don't usually see bears depredating on livestock. It does happen, and when it happens, it tends to be things like sheep. But bears are an omnivore. They eat a variety of stuff. While they do sometimes depredate, it's not the common damage that we see. Contrast that with cougar. As a carnivore, when we see cougar conflict and damage, it's usually related to livestock: sheep, goats, cattle, occasionally horse, poultry, and unfortunately, sometimes we do have cougar depredation on pets also. So damage, nuisance, that's some of what we're seeing here in Oregon. And I should say that, there's a lot of different tools that landowners have to address that, and take sometimes falls within that. So what does the law allow when a landowner is experiencing that damage? And I'm going to preface this slide by saying it's complicated. I always recommend that someone that's experiencing damage from bear, cougar, reach out to their local ODFW office, talk to our staff, discuss the specifics of your conflict and the legal options available. And I'm going to touch on some high level stuff here, but for other people that might be listening or watching this online, I'm not going into all the details of the criteria and what needs to happen. But at the high level, statute requires that there must be loss or harm. That's fits in the definition of damage and nuisance. So if a landowner is experiencing loss or harm, then it opens up the door for them to use lethal take as a tool to resolve that. There's no requirement to engage with the department prior to take when it comes to bear and cougar, and so no permit necessary. The statute has some language that says nothing in the wildlife laws is intended to prevent any person from taking wildlife that is causing damage or is a public nuisance on their property. It goes on to say, kind of paraphrasing, you've got to do it within the season structure and the regulations the commission sets or by a permit, except for bear, cougar, and bobcat and red fox. You don't need that permit. And so with that, there's not a requirement for that reaching out to us first, to getting a permit first. And so we don't have permit conditions and those sorts of things for these species like we do for many other species that take is one of the solutions. There is a requirement for notification. And so if a landowner takes a bear, cougar on damage, they're required to notify a person capable of enforcing the wildlife laws. It's generally going to be state police. Notifications go to our staff. And then lastly, there's some very specific language about use of agents and how a landowner designates an agent and the documentation for that. And so it can be someone acting on the landowner's behalf. When it comes to damage, then that take may occur by the landowner or their agent, could also occur by our staff or USDA Wildlife Services staff. And so we can see what we're talking about with Trap Check would apply to all of those today, including, we're not talking about exemptions for ODFW staff or Wildlife Services staff. I will point out that for safety, so safety is aggressive actions, loss of wariness of people, attacking pets, breaking into residences. And with that, there's some allowances for a person to defend safety. And again, with that, there's notification required. Generally, trapping is not the solution that's used by a landowner or a person there. When trapping, usually when there's an immediate safety issue, that's going to be potentially addressed by shooting if necessary. If traps are used, that's generally going to fall to ODFW Wildlife Services, and again, would be subject to rules passed today. And then as a reminder, we do see trap check requirements for other species currently. And those are in place for fur-bearing mammals and predatory animals. And those trap checks requirements include both recreational trapping for these species as well as trapping for damage or conflict. Our current rules for these species require a 48-hour trap check for all traps that are set for fur-bearing mammals. And when restraining traps are set for predatory animals, that's subject to a 48-hour trap check. If it's a killing trap or snare, so something that's meant to kill instantly, then that requirement is a check every 14 days for predatory animals. Those want to remind you that those predatory animal trap checks were last modified in 2022, and that was following a trap check work group that met, facilitated work group. We have people on the commission now that were part of that work group, but that work group met 8 times in 2021 and early 2022, didn't come to consensus on recommendations for changes. But then later in 2022, through the fur bearer regulations, predatory animal trap check times were modified and really dropped back to that 48 hours. Previously, they had been longer at 72 hours for non-damage, 7 days for damage, 30 days for killing traps, and that got shortened to just 2 categories: killing traps, 14 days, and and restraining traps 48. So another thing to understand on this topic is some of the requirements that we see for bear and cougar carcass disposal and utilization that is different than we see for other wildlife species. So first of all, when bears or cougars are taken on damage or safety, there is a requirement that those animals come into the department. So our rules say you have to deliver that carcass to a place of the department's choosing. Generally, that's going to be our office. You don't see that with other wildlife kill permits necessarily. For some species, we issue a deer kill permit, it might go to a meat processor or something. But these are the two species that we say, no, you've got to bring them to our office or a place of our choosing, which may be a meat processor. We are required on damage, not safety, but on damage, to offer that carcass back to the landowner that incurred the damage. And so that's a little bit different for these two species. And then I will point out that we have some options for bears as edible wildlife. So bears are considered edible wildlife. We have some options for disposal and utilization of that carcass. That includes human consumption. And so many of those carcasses end up getting utilized through soup kitchens, homeless shelters, as a utilization source. When a landowner chooses to retain a carcass, then that ends up getting consumed also. Cougars are a little bit different. They're not an edible wildlife species. There are plenty of times when a landowner accepts that offer that we have to make to retain the carcass, and they may choose to consume it. But as wildlife that's not defined as edible, we don't end up taking those carcasses to meat processors for homeless. That's treated a little bit different. And this is separate than other wildlife that are trapped. These are the bears in particular, the ones that have that edible component to them. So in the development of trap check rules and a staff proposal to bring before you, there's a couple of things that were in staff's mind as we went about this, call them kind of some goals of an outcome. Of course, one of those goals was to remain compliant with statutes. And so statutes essentially are saying a landowner can take nothing, I'll phrase it more exactly, nothing in the wildlife laws is intended to prevent a landowner from taking. And so we want to make sure that what we propose allows a landowner a reasonable chance to use trapping, because if we're preventing them from taking by being too restrictive, then we are falling out of bounds. And so we kept that in mind, of course. And then we wanted to consider animal welfare and establishing a maximum time that an animal could remain in a trap. Currently for bears and cougars, there is no established maximum time, and so looking to establish that. We also wanted to remain compliant with disposal rules, so we wouldn't have to go in and adjust disposal rules, but really maintain that current emphasis on human consumption. Disposal rules do allow, in some cases, for disposal in a landfill or utilization as food for rehabbed animals, but our priority has been human consumption whenever possible, and we wanted to keep that as a primary priority. And then kind of a fourth goal was to not affect any of the current hunting season regulations and restrictions in place. And so to make sure that this remains separate and tied to damage and conflict and not part of recreation, and have a clear, clean break there. So the resulting staff proposal that I'm bringing before you is to establish a trap check requirement that would apply to any person that's setting a trap for bear or cougar, and that would include ODFW staff and wildlife services staff. This trap check requirement would be that the trap is checked, inspected at least every other calendar day, but not exceeding 56 hours, and that any trapped animals be removed. Really, I think you've read testimony and I've heard testimony about 48-hour trap check desires that some people have. I've heard people in conversations in this development, asking for more. This is really based in principle on a 48-hour framework, but allowing time for that work that's associated with processing and preserving an animal for human consumption. So it takes time to field dress, and at times a trapper that's doing an every other day trap check that's on a 48-hour schedule. If the temperature's hot, they may need to stop their trap check, transport an animal carcass into a meat processor and go back and finish. And so really thought about the problems that happen when you start to put that up against the requirement that the next trap has to be checked, and not wanting a carcass of an animal from earlier in the day to then spoil. And when I say based on a 48-hour framework, with this not to exceed 56 hours, I will point out that if a trapper set out to check traps at a 56-hour interval, that every other day calendar requirement would soon come into play, because as you extend out each day, you would get to a point where you couldn't continue to extend out because you would miss that every other calendar day. And so the every other calendar day is to really stick to, it's an every other day. The intent is to be close to that 48 hours, but to give flexibility to address an animal that's caught without being in violation for the remaining traps that might be checked that day. And then lastly, and it was on purpose, we say that the person who sets the trap is responsible for ensuring that it's checked, because we know that there are times when a landowner or somebody may have to complete that trap check because the trapper can't make it there, and that's fine and would be allowed within these rules. But to avoid that, who's responsible? It is the person who sets it that's responsible for ensuring that it gets checked. And so with that, I believe we have a number of people signed up for public testimony. Chair Wall, at your discretion, I can take questions now or after public testimony.
I think what we'd like to do, Brian, thank you for the presentation. Any quick questions, commissioners? And then we have 18 people who would like to testify. So if you have a couple quick questions that you'd like to get off the, taken care of right now, that's great. Go ahead, Commissioner Moldal.
Thanks, Chair Wall. Brian, thank you for the presentation. Real quick question. 48 hours, 56 hours, when does the time start? How do we know when the time starts? How do we know when the time stops? In other words, are we relying upon the trapper to disclose that to OSP? Help us understand the stopwatch.
Yeah, Chair Wall, Commissioner Moldal, there's not, and currently doesn't exist for recreational trapping either, a logbook requirement. And so this falls into your standard OSP enforcement. And so there's a number of tools that they might rely on. Some of that is tips and complaints. Some of it is just being in the field and what they observe and documenting what they observe. And if you had a situation where an animal was in a trap for longer than that, I believe that's happened before with traps that are set for other species. Those are all things that they keep track of, and when it hits that, so that the specific start and stop would be that point in time in which the trap is confirmed to be empty. And so when the trap is visited, and I'll say in this case, we're not prohibiting remote trap check. And so if the trap is empty and you know for certain that it's empty, at that point, that starts the clock till the next trap check. And so then that next trap check is completed when it's confirmed that the trap is empty again, or if there's an animal in it, that animal is dispatched and removed from the trap or released if it's a non-target animal. And so to complete a trap check with an animal in it, you must actually remove the animal from the trap before that's complete.
Thank you.
It looks like there aren't other questions, so I think we'll go ahead and start with the testimony. And we don't go too far from the room. Brian Posowitz, Kelly Peterson, Sierra Buer, and the first two are in the room. The other person is online. And after those three, then Christy LaHaye, Andrea Kozel, and John Vanderberg. So if you will start, Brian, and then Kelly, and then we'll go online for Sierra. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Wall, Director Colbert, members of the commission. My name is Brian Posowitz, and I'm here again today on behalf of Humane Voters Oregon. Sorry, you have to listen to me twice in one day, although I think it's a rarity for me. I participated in the work group discussions on this and very much appreciate being included in that. We also very much appreciate that the agency is setting some trap check requirements for bears and cougars, given that none exist now. That said, we think the proposed rule will allow too much time between trap checks for traps set for bear and cougars. It seems to me that this is fundamentally just an ethical question, which is how long should we permit an animal caught in a trap to suffer in that trap before the trapper is required to check the trap and end the suffering of the animal. In our view, that time limit should be 24 hours. That's what the American Veterinary Medical Association recommends from an animal welfare perspective. Also in the Trapper Education Manual of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies from 2022, it says that traps should be checked every day. And several states require a 24-hour trap check time, and that there's a spreadsheet submitted with our coalition testimony that shows where the different states are on this. At the very most, trap check times for bears and cougars should be a strict 48 hours. That is still too long, but at least it would be consistent with the trap check times set for other species. That would help avoid confusion about trap check times in general. You can, to me, you can imagine if it's up to 56 for some animals, that is just by word of mouth going to start bleeding into other understandings about how much time is allowed between trap checks. And we just think the 56 hours proposed by staff for bears and cougars, because the staff proposal is every other day, but up to 56 hours. We just think that is too long. That the logistical problems related to salvaging a bear caught in a trap and the desire to salvage the meat from that bear can be solved in other ways, that trap check schedules can be set in a way that just allow for that extra time it takes to salvage the bear, or another person could be on standby either to deal with the bear caught in the trap while the primary person checks the rest of the trap line, or the person on standby can check the rest of the trap line while the primary person salvages the bear. And you saw in the presentation that the rules would allow that a person other than the person who set the trap could check the additional traps. And just at some point, we think that the logistical problems for trappers need to give way to compassion for suffering animals. In our view, that point should be at 24 hours, and at the very most, it should be the 48 hours that is set for other species. That standard should be consistent for bears and cougars. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde, Director Colbert. Commissioners, my name is Kelly Peterson. I'm the Oregon State Director for Humane World for Animals. First, I want to thank ODFW staff for bringing forward the first ever proposal for trap check times for black bears and cougars. It's been over 30 years. It's about time. I'm so grateful. As reflected in our coalition letter, we do, as Brian indicated, believe that a 24-hour trap check time is the more humane standard, also consistent with the majority of other states. Every additional hour an animal is caught in a restraining trap is another hour They remain injured, exposed to the elements. They suffer before someone is legally required to return. And while we do believe a 24-hour trap check time is the more humane standard, at a minimum, we're asking that 48-hour trap check times be adopted. Is consistent with the other trap check times for fur bearers and predatory animals in restraining traps. Bears and cougars should receive no less protection. While today's discussion is about bears and cougars, restraining traps are inherently indiscriminate. Once set, they cannot distinguish between the intended animal and any other animal that encounters them. For example, in 2024 alone, Wildlife Services reported 17 non-target animals caught in these traps, including dogs and cats, foxes, skunks, and bobcats. And at least 3 of those animals died. And those are just the reports from Wildlife Services. Non-target captures as it relates to private landowners and others are less clear. And we do appreciate that ODF&W considered operational realities associated with the proposed rule. At the same time, we believe the welfare of the living animal should define the standard. And the 56-hour interval seems to be driven by one potential operational circumstance, and that is involving the salvage of the captured bear. And a single operational circumstance should not determine the statewide standard that applies to every animal caught in these traps. And potential operational practices, including the salvage requirements, should be planned around the standard and shouldn't define it. And this isn't simply about trap check times, it's about the responsibility that comes with placing a restraining trap on the landscape and deciding how long any wild animal or even a domestic animal caught in that trap can remain before someone is required to return. So for these reasons, we are asking that you strengthen the proposal to 48 hours at a minimum for black bears and cougars, which is consistent with other wild animals. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. And we will go to the next people. A couple are not still in the room. So Andrea Kozel, John Vandenberg, and Lindsay, I think it's Helling, and then Kim Norris, Deborah Merskin, and Dana Robinson, all online. So Andrea.
Hi, my name is Andrea Kozel, and I am here to testify, just as Kelly and Brian have before me, in favor of a 24-hour trap check requirement for bears and cougars. We already know that traps are indiscriminate, and any animal who is trapped will suffer, whether it's from element exposure, predators, or simply by having a body part caught in a trap. I think Brian mentioned this, that the International Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Trapper Educational Manual states that animal welfare is a top priority and recommends a 24-hour trap check requirement, and even goes so far as to say that traps should be checked at daylight since fur bearers are nocturnal. Again, the focus is reducing the amount of suffering, the length of suffering for those animals who are trapped. Since trapping bears and cougars is allowed only under a limited exception, Oregon's strongest humane standards should be applied to keep things consistent. And in my opinion, and I know in the opinion of many others, any argument against checking traps in an ethical and a responsible manner should be dismissed. We're talking about having the responsibility to care for our wildlife. Oregonians want our wildlife protected. We want our wildlife to be cared for, whether it's a landowner, a livestock owner, a wildlife biologist. Anyone who sets a trap should be mature enough and responsible enough to check it within a humane standard, which is 24 hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We'll go to John Vandenberg, and then a couple others are also not available. So Deborah after that, and then Dana. So John.
Okay, thank you, Chair Wall, members of the commission, Director Colbert. First, thank you for your service. I'm John Vandenberg. I'm in Clackamas County, and I would respectfully ask each of you to ask this question of yourself. Is a bear or a cougar who was raised by her mother for up to 2 years someone or something? And if you're thinking she's something, then I ask you to consider the dogs, the cats, and the horses, the other animals you've encountered, and whether they were just merely a thing. But if you think she is someone, then I would suggest that even early humans knew in their heart that it was wrong to allow someone to suffer, trapped, and feel pain and fear for any length of time. When someone is in pain and in fear, every minute matters. So I would ask, consistent with what you've heard from the coalition, that you, reconsider the staff's proposal and give it a good discussion and hopefully conclude that 24 hours needs to be required. Thank you again for your service.
Thank you, John. We will go then to Deborah Merskin.
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon, Chair Wall and Commissioners. My name is Deborah Merskin, and I'm a resident of Central Oregon, Crook County, and more specifically, Powell Butte. I live out where we have wildlife, not as much as we used to, but every day, as my trail cam shows me, or rather almost every night, they're here trying to live their lives. I'm echoing what many of the others have said, asking you to strengthen the proposed trap check rule for black bears and cougars, and specifically to require checks every 24 hours, with 48 as an absolute outside limit, not the current 56, to be consistent with other species, and that welfare should define the standard. I want to be clear, I appreciate that ODFW is proposing a check requirement at all. Right now, there's no limit whatsoever. A bear or cougar can legally be in a trap for days and even weeks. The rule makes progress, but every other calendar day not exceeding 56 hours still permits an animal to suffer in a trap for 2.5 days. And it's, as was pointed out, they are not the only species, the targeted species who are trapped. These are not humane devices. Foothold traps, cage traps, cable neck snares, all cause documented psychological distress, dehydration, and injury, much of it invisible without veterinary examination. On average, roughly 220 bears and 60 cougars are trapped in Oregon each year, and they are not selective. Bobcats, raccoons, domestic dogs, and cats are routinely caught in the same gear, which means a shorter check interval protects far more than just the two species discussed today. As someone with a background in media studies, animal law, and familiarity with wildlife rehabilitation, I'd add that the public understanding of these welfare stakes is limited precisely because the suffering is largely invisible and underreported. Wildlife is held in the public trust. They should be cared for and about. A 24-hour standard is achievable, it's consistent with animal welfare science, and it's the right threshold for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will go next to George Weir, Sally Compton, Gary Lauder. So George, I'm sorry, I think it's Georgia.
Hi,
Sorry.
it's Georgia, and thank you for considering this important issue related to Oregon's iconic wildlife. I want to request that you please set requirements specifying that bear and cougar traps be checked every 24 hours or at the very least every 48. I've been involved in trapping feral cats, and I know the stress we subject animals to when we trap them, even if our objective is to save their lives. But even if we intend to kill them, after trapping them, it is only humane to reduce the stress and terror of trapping while they are alive until they do die. Also, by checking the traps in a timely manner, we can reduce the injuries and deaths, as people have said, of pets and other animals that are accidentally trapped. If if we can't check our traps in this reasonable amount of time, we simply should not set the traps. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. Sally Compton, do you want to go ahead, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Sally Compton. I'm the Executive Director of Think Wild, and today I'm speaking on behalf of Think Wild and 3 veterinarians on our staff and board who signed our written testimony. As a wildlife hospital and conservation organization serving Central and Eastern Oregon, we strongly support a 24-hour maximum trap check interval for bears and cougars, or at an absolute minimum, a firm 48-hour maximum. In our wildlife hospital, we regularly treat animals suffering from injuries, dehydration, exposure, and severe stress, and we see firsthand how quickly an animal's condition can deteriorate. For non-target animals caught in traps, the first 24 hours can be especially critical. An animal may already be injured when it enters a trap, or it may injure itself attempting to escape. The longer it remains restrained, the greater the opportunity for dehydration, exposure, stress, and injury to become severe or irreversible. And earlier intervention can make the difference between the animal that can be successfully treated and released or ones who have progressed too far. For target animals, the welfare concern is just as important. Whether a bear or cougar is ultimately going to be relocated or euthanized, leaving that animal restrained for an extended period causes unnecessary stress and suffering, and it should be attended to as soon as reasonably possible. Bycatch is also likely severely underreported, particularly in wildlife services trapping. And here in Central Oregon, we frequently hear reports of dogs and cats being caught in traps in addition to non-target wildlife. I see reports of cats and dogs being caught in traps on Nextdoor and Reddit, I would say like at least once a month. Because any animal can enter these traps, trap check requirements should account for the welfare of all animals that may be captured and not just the intended species. So please, again, we urge the commission to adopt a 24-hour maximum or at a minimum a 48-hour limit. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. We'll go to Gary Lauder and then Story Warren, who's in the room, and then Tyler Dungannon. And then we have one more person after that, Stan Steele. The other people that were on the list appear not to be here. So if you are online and I haven't talked to you, just make yourself known. Oh, okay, we've had a couple others show up, so I'll get back to those. But in the meantime, Gary Lauder and then Story Warren.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Gary Lauder. I'm a concerned citizen living in Bend, Oregon. I have some experience working with injured wildlife and pets. Any trapped animal, badly injured or not, suffers greatly from stress and fear alone. It usually gets even worse with dehydration, pain, and the resulting injuries. As I understand it, most states do require a daily or 24-hour check on trapped animals, and a 48-hour trap time exists for many species in Oregon that can be recreationally trapped. The gap in regulations remains for bears and cougars since they're classified as game animals and weren't included in the 2022 ruling, as you've heard today. Black bear and cougar can be trapped on private land under specific circumstances. Landowners can even give written permission to someone else or themselves with no permit required. These traps cannot discriminate between species and are essentially landmines for wildlife. Government data identifies non-target species that are often caught, like domestic dogs, bobcats, porcupines, foxes, raccoons, skunks, even deer and bighorn sheep. These incidents occurred even when the traps were checked daily or even twice daily under trained biologists. What kind of agony occurs when these traps are left for multiple days, sometimes set by untrained private citizens? The longer an animal is stuck, as been shared today, in a trap of any kind, the greater the suffering. Every hour counts. Thankfully, we now have the opportunity to make meaningful change in this policy in Oregon that will reduce this kind of suffering. Please consider making this reasonable change to minimize suffering and to better align with other states' trap management rules. I would strongly encourage us to set the 24-hour trap time, but like others have stated, a 48-hour maximum should be put in place. Also, with modern tech changes, I think remote checks should make this policy even easier to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will go to Story Warren. And if Austin James is in the room, will you please come on up and then we'll have you right after Story, and then we'll go back to Sierra Viewer that I understand is also online now. So go ahead, Story, and then we'll go to Austin.
Hello, thank you, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Director Colbert, and members of the Commission. My name is Story Warren. You have heard me speak before in my capacity as Wildlife Program Manager for Humane World for Animals, but today I'm speaking as a private citizen about my own experiences. Sometimes trapping is spoken about in the abstract, and I wanted to zoom in and talk more about exactly what trapping can look like for individual animals. As a wildlife biology undergraduate, I assisted 2 teams with Western state agencies over 3 seasons helping to trap, track, and place collars on wolves. My experiences with foothold traps, which are the main trap type used for cougars in Oregon. These are some of the things that I witnessed. A young wolf sustained an extremely deep slice to her ankle after she struggled against the trap. She had chewed on all of the branches and vegetation in the radius around the trap so much that they were covered in blood and her mouth was bloody. Other wolves lost teeth or sustained bloody gums. One non-target capture, a young coyote, chewed off his own toes, and the supervising biologist with ODFW ended his life because the coyote likely would not have survived if he had been released. All of these incidents happened with traps that were checked daily or even twice daily. These were traps set by trained professional biologists who had every intent of releasing animals unharmed. The traps used were also considered one of the most humane options available. It's difficult to imagine the distress, dehydration, overheating, and injury that an animal experiences when left in any trap type for up to 56 hours. Not to mention the high risk that a non-target capture cannot be safely released after that time. During my experience, other non-target captures included a domestic dog and a black bear, who thankfully could be released, but it is also worth noting that not all trapping injuries are visible without a necropsy and can impact survival weeks later. According again to the Trapper Education Manual by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, quote, responsible trappers will visit their traps daily. There is less chance for predation and less chance an animal will injure itself, end quote. It's also worth mentioning that damage trapping in Oregon does not currently require a trapper education course. No one wants to see an animal go to waste, but that cannot be at the expense of the animals who are still alive in traps. It is the trapper's responsibility to account for processing times when setting and running a trap line. If not 24 hours, 48 hours should be the absolute maximum trap check interval. Oregonians of all backgrounds value the ethical and humane treatment of the public's wildlife. Thank you for considering this important issue.
Thank you, Story. Austin, will you go ahead, please?
Good afternoon, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Director Colbert. My name is Austin James, and I am here representing myself. As a private contractor who conducts these activities, I see the proposal as reasonable and prudent. I support the proposal as drafted. I would also like to recommend that this is private property and damage we're talking about, not fur trapping. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you for your brevity. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for staying so long to testify as well. Sierra Buer?
Yes, hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Sierra Buer. I'm a veterinarian and educator and an advocate for animals of all species. I'm from Powell Butte, Oregon. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I appreciate that this is being proposed after it's a long overdue trap check requirement change for bears and cougars. I think a 48-hour maximum requirement would align bears and cougars with Oregon's existing trap check requirements for other trapped mammals. Even better, I think a 24-hour maximum trap check interval is the more humane standard because it makes even bigger strides to help reduce animal suffering. Many states have similar requirements. I don't think it's hard for any of us to imagine an animal being made to suffer in a painful trap out in the elements with injuries. Any amount of prolonged and untreated pain is inhumane by most standards, at least in the veterinary world. Trapped bears and cougars feel this pain and stress no less than any other species. More frequent trap checks reduce unnecessary suffering and improve outcomes for non-target wildlife. So while I prefer a 24-hour trap check requirement at a minimum, I ask that you please strengthen the proposal by requiring the traps to be checked at least every 48 hours, as many people have already stated. Thank you for taking this very important step.
Thank you, Sierra, and we'll go to Tyler Dungannon online and then Stan Steele. So Stan, you can come on up if you'd like.
Thank you, Chair Wall, Commissioners, and Director Colbert. For the record, my name is Tyler Dungannon. I'm the Conservation Director for Oregon Hunters Association. OHA represents more than 12,000 dues-paying members, and OHA supports staff proposed 56-hour damage trap check time for bear and cougar here. The proposal reflects a balanced approach to address damage, and I think most importantly ensures the retention of an important wildlife management tool as written here. So we support the proposal by ODFW staff. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Tyler, and thanks for sticking with us all this time. Go ahead, Stan.
Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, and Commissioners, my name is Stan Steele. Complex issue, one that I think really has deserved the attention that it is now getting. We should have standards for everything that we harvest. We have hook size regulations. We have shot regulations. There's nothing, in other words, shot shells. There's nothing wrong with having standards for all wildlife harvest, whether it is damage or just recreational. But we also have to understand that what we're talking about is private property damage. We have incredible forest cooperatives in the two cooperatives that we actually work with that actually do the majority of the bear damage work. Peeling is substantial, sometimes millions of dollars a year. So while Oregon is burning at the same time, we have other requirements to make sure that those lands are managed for the purpose that they're actually being managed for, the ownership. Whether it's cougar on sheep, coyotes on sheep, or bear on trees, the state has a responsibility to manage those. Now, we want that done with animal welfare right up front. To think that trappers or even land managers are heartless beings is kind of leaving a human dimension out of there that we probably should consider. So I want to applaud the department for starting this process, and even those who want to see trapping banned. That's when we work together and collaboratively come up with some solutions. We think that the proposed rule is a solution that will work. Now, what's great thing about wildlife management and rulemaking is it's fluid. We can change. If we see that something needs changed, we can come back to the commission as not only landowners and their reps, but practitioners. So we feel that the 56-hour requirement is a good step. Still allows a large geographic area to be worked by a few practitioners. So thank you for this time. And if you have any questions, we'd appreciate them.
No questions at this time, and I appreciate you staying around to speak to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan. Commissioners, that's the end of public testimony, so we'll ask that Brian come back up for questions, and then we can get a quick sense of the commission on this one and move maybe to a vote. Any questions? Can you see? Just one second. The truth is I can't tell if those two commissioners have their hands up, and I rely on the director who has younger eyes than I do. Thank you. Then we will look for, do you have a question or a sense? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Spellberg.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wall. Just a quick question. I think I know the answer to this question, but remote monitoring is acceptable for meeting the trap check time requirement. Is that true?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Spellbrink, yes, as long as it's reliable, and I would say would have to have both negative notification, like no animal present, as well as positive. And that positive notification, as I mentioned earlier, wouldn't start the clock on trap check because the animal's not removed. You'd be looking at that last negative. But I will say the one of and the most important goal of setting a trap check requirement is around animal welfare, and remote trap check devices can really aid in getting there faster. And so we do see those in use some, but not in use everywhere. And in some places, they're not practical to use because of terrain, cell signal, view of the sky for satellite. There's some things that hinder that. And so it's not universal, but we do see it in use. And when it is being used, it's primarily being used so they can respond as quick as possible.
Thank you.
Then other questions, or would you like to go to sense? Okay. Did you have a question, Commissioner Moldall?
I
Go
do have
ahead.
a question. Thank you, Chair Wall. Hope I'm not stepping, Chair Morrison first, please.
Oh. Commissioner Morrison, do you have your hand up?
I do. Thank you, Chair Wall.
Go
Just,
ahead.
I guess,
apologies.
No problem at all. Just one question, I guess. My understanding is there are a number of other states that have, 48-hour trap check times in place. What's not clear to me is that those are specifically related to damage, trapping related to damage. So that's kind of part of the question. Is it true that, those states that have 48 hours, that's related to damage and not fur-bearing animals or predatory animals? And then if it is related to damage, perhaps you can help me to understand what's unique about Oregon where that additional 8 hours would be merited. I understand the idea that we're trying to salvage bears for human consumption, and that's laudable. And so maybe that is the unique thing about Oregon, is that focus is there. But again, so two-part question. Is that 48 hours that other states have related to damage trapping? And if so, what makes Oregon unique where that additional 8 hours is really necessary?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Morrison, I will start by saying there's a lot of states and I don't have, intimate knowledge of all of them, but I will say it's a bit of a mix. And so there are certainly states where their trap check requirement is in place the same, whether it is for recreational trapping or damage trapping. There are other states where there's differences. And so when I look at some of our neighboring states, I think I'll also point out that the use of permits, or, like in our case, each state has different laws around damage too. And so in some states, they may not have a trap check requirement for damage, but they may have a required permit where they can put conditions on it that may include that. And those can be varied based on the situation. So it's hard to compare state to state to state because there's different, underlying or overlying statutes. I did ask staff to get me some information on some of our neighboring states, and as I recall, Washington's trap check is the same, damage or not. Within California, you have some permit requirements that they can specify trap check within those permit requirements for damage. But then, like a state like Idaho, they have trap check requirements for recreational trapping, but their large carnivore, bear, cougar, that sort of work is largely done by USDA Wildlife Services, and they're exempt from that. And so the agency, Wildlife Services, gets to determine what is appropriate for the situation. So it's pretty variable. Yeah.
Thanks. It's complex.
Did you have another question as well, Commissioner Morrison?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair Wall.
Thank you.
Chair Wall, thank you. My question is along the same lines, Brian. He got it, that question. So consistency, not that we need to be among states, but it'd be nice to know where we land. I think I'm following the logic here. So are we creating confusion with a 48-hour trap check and a 56-hour trap check when it seems like the time start and stop is very much up to the trapper. Is this a problem for OSP? Could you help us understand, please?
Chair Wall, Commissioner Muldall, a couple of things there for me to address. And so are we creating confusion? Potentially, but there's also some other very specific differences with, lack of permit required and notification required and check-in required. And so there is inherently built into bear and cougar trapping some differences than trapping coyotes or something else. And so this would become part of that education piece. But yes, potential that would create some confusion for someone. And in terms of enforcement, I'm not going to say enforcement of this is easy. And so regardless of whether it's every other day not to exceed 56 or they could still on negative notifications and those sort of challenge that are false.
Vice Chair Hatfield. Yeah, I appreciate, I guess I was really surprised that we didn't already have time for bears early where that. So we can sit all day, 4 hours, 48 hours, 50, but the come for me moment in time is that it's long overdue. We have a trap check. So I just want to really appreciate the logic of the 56 hours. Maybe it's just a math problem. I'm really bad with math. I don't quite understand quite get it. Like, are we trying to say, like, if I'm trapping bears on a large forest private land tract, and I might have multiple traps set for bears that are doing to trees. If I come along and there's a bear that's in my trap, I want to take that bear and get it somewhere immediately so that it can be harvested for consumption. And in the meantime, I might be missing another bear that's in a trap that needs. Is that what we're saying? Like, just sorry if I'm like just can't get it in my head, but that's basically what you're trying to communicate.
Yes, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde. Essentially, that's it. Whether there's another bear in a trap or just traps to be tagged. There's a fair number of times when a trapper is working, maybe multiple different owners. There's not a lot of people doing this work. So a lot of expertise there. So the person be working over a large area, maybe checking traps and 12 traps a day, and it may take 8 hours, 10 hours to get through those trap checks. And so if we capture an animal and have to, unlike say a smaller animal, if it's say coyote damage, remove it from the trap, put it back in the vehicle and go on their way. It's going to involve field dressing, loading in a vehicle, maybe remove the skin, maybe taking it in meat processor, and going back and reading the track of the remainder of that line. And if they choose to check the remainder of the line, in the meantime, that if they just order in the day, that meat may spoil.
So, I mean, as we think, what's the Oregon approach to that? My understanding of these trap check intervals for states near us, around us, or in the western states is it looks like it's a pretty mixed bag. So I was kind of where this came, but I'm thinking this idea of being able to harvest an animal for food if a damaged animal um, is probably that you came up with that based on probably being in discussions over time with the trappers that we actually deal with in Oregon that are dealing with like bear. Is that accurate?
Chair Wall, Chair have conversations with trappers, and I'll say some of the concern also was vehicle downs, a tree the road,
Right.
a road slide, and
Yeah.
what that means and having flexibility. I understand that. To me, the more compelling discussion was about those choices come with salvage and spoilage versus going to be violation of a rule. You know, at the end of the day, class A misdemeanor crime and where's
Right.
that really falls into the recommendation piece too. Like I could say I would recommend daily trap check if you can put a recommendation versus when cross the line and it's a misdemeanor crime. That's what the rule is where is that line for that illegal crimes.
Right, that makes sense. So, actually, I think there is some here, and I think somebody is, if this developed based on that sort of feedback, these are likely people who are, very engaged in this activity, and it's what they're doing. So they're checking these straps, or like if you're wanting to also be able to use it for human consumption, checking it. So I have a knee-jerk response to be like, no, let's go to 48 hours just to match everything else and match, be somewhere with similar to some of the other states, not all of the other states, but I think it's sort of um, worth thinking about this, and just I would say I could support the staff recommendation. Thank you, Commissioner Lenhart. Pardon me? Sense. Please.
Okay, thank you, Chair Wall. So I've been giving this a lot of thought too. So for today's discussion, I'm approaching the proposed trap check rule question of balance. How to protect the welfare of captured bears and cougars while recognizing the practical field responsibilities that rise when a bear is trapped and must be salvaged under Oregon law. The Commission previously directed staff to develop rules establishing trap check requirements for traps used to capture bears or cougars classified as game animals when these animals are taken in response to damage, nuisance, or public safety concerns. That direction was given primarily by concerns about the welfare of the animals held in traps. As the Commission knows, Oregon currently has no specific trap check interval for traps set for bears or comparison. Trap check requirements already apply to virtually every other trapping situation. State statute requires traps set for fur-bearing mammals to be checked every 48 hours. Administrative rules require traps set for predatory animals to also be checked every 48 hours. There is an important consideration in this discussion, though. When a bear or cougar is captured for damage or public safety, it must be handled and disposed of in accordance with state law. Because black bears are classified as edible wildlife, meat salvage is required under law, with disposal options that include donation to charitable organizations or to an eligible low-income or medically qualified individual. Recognizing the importance and the sensitivity of this issue, staff convened a small group of organizations representing interest parties for discussion, and Brian participated in part of one of those groups. The participants did not reach consensus on an appropriate trap check interval. Still, the meeting served an important purpose, in my opinion. It gave the different interests an opportunity to hear directly from one another rather than receiving those concerns separately through staff or written comments. I believe that was worthwhile and a constructive effort. Even when consensus cannot be reached, and bringing people together to better understand one another's concerns is important. I'm going to attempt to summarize the various positions expressed at the meeting by primarily interest groups, and it may help us to reach the educated decision. And I want to thank Brian for helping me with this and answering questions that I had regarding that. The Wildlife Coalition. The coalition supports a 24-hour trap check requirement. They've also indicated that if a 24-hour requirement cannot be agreed to, the 48-hour maximum for black bears and cougars would at least provide consistency with an existing requirement for fur bearers and unprotected mammals and establish a clear minimum standard for welfare of trapped animals. We heard that in the testimony. Landowners and trappers. Many landowners and trappers prefer a 72-hour interval. Their primary concern is the practical challenge associated with required salvage of a bear. And Brian mentioned this, including field dressing, loading, transportation, and delivery to a meat processor, as well as the potential for an unseen circumstance such as flat tire, down trees, cross roads, causing delay in trap checks. Those stakeholder perspectives are important, but they're not the only not the only sources the Commission can consider. It is also useful to compare Oregon's discussion with a broader professional guidance and neighboring state approaches. It is also useful to look beyond Oregon to understand how other organizations and jurisdictions approach trap check standards. The National Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies North American Trapper Education Manual recommends that responsible trappers check their traps at least once every day. The recommendation is based largely on animal welfare and does not distinguish between fur bearer, predatory, or game animals. The American Veterinary Medical Association similarly recommends that traps be checked at least every 24 hours and encourages the use of trap alarms. Again, the recommendation does not distinguish between the classifications of wildlife. Both organizations are clear that they do not set legally binding trap check intervals. Those decisions remain the responsibility of the individual states, i.e. us. Washington takes a somewhat different approach, requiring restraining traps to be visually checked every calendar day with captured animals removed within 24 hours. Lethal traps must be checked and animals removed within 72 hours. There were 439 comments submitted on this issue, reflecting a wide range of perspectives. These letters and emails did not necessarily provide a single answer for Oregon, but they do demonstrate that animal welfare is a central consideration in establishing trap check standards. So let's discuss the staff recommendation. Staff explains that they are trying to balance animal welfare with the practical realities associated with responding to a trapped bear or cougar. Staff considered, but ultimately did not recommend a strict 48-hour requirement. The concern is that when a bear is captured, the time required to properly salvage the carcass for human consumption may make the rigid 48-hour requirement difficult to meet. Salvage requires a minimum field dressing, loading, transporting to a meat processor in order to prevent spoilage. A trapper checking traps every other day could potentially become non-compliant with a trap check requirement while still appropriately handling and transporting a salvaged bear. This situation is different from many other species subject to the existing 48-hour requirements because those animals generally do not require the same meat processing salvage process. They can be removed from a trap much more quickly, allowing the trapper to continue checking the remainder of the trap line. At the same time, staff did not recommend the 72-hour interval because that could allow an animal to remain in the trap for more than 2 days. Staff recommendation is therefore intended as the middle ground. Under the proposed standards, traps set for bear cougar would have to be checked and all animals removed at least once every other calendar day with no interval exceeding 56 hours. The intent is to approximate the existing 48-hour check cycle while providing a limited amount of additional time when a bear is captured and must be handled in accordance with statutory salvage requirements. Staff believes this approach would establish a clear maximum period that an animal could potentially remain in a trap, provide additional time for properly accommodate the salvage of edible meat, clarify that a person who sets the trap remains responsible, ensuring that it is checked within the required interval while allowing another person to conduct an actual check, retain existing carcass disposal requirements for bears and cougars, retain existing bear and cougar hunting regulations. The Farm Bureau and Oregon Forest Industries Council sent letters in support of the department's recommendation. emerging technology. This is, in my opinion, pretty important. Another development worth considering is the increasing use of remote trap monitoring technology by some North Coast landowners. These systems can transmit a satellite message to a cell phone approximately every 6 hours, indicating whether the trap has been sprung. Once a landowner receives that notification, they know that an animal may be captured and can respond accordingly. In practice, particularly with bears, this technology can result in significantly faster response times than a traditional trap check schedule. The equipment remains relatively expensive, and there is still work to be done to improve the reliability, and Brian talked about that. Nevertheless, it appears that remote monitoring technology may become an increasingly important part of responsible trap management in the future. I hope it does. I think we should be open to the use of reliable technology. If technology can provide earlier notification and faster response while maintaining accountability, it could become an important tool for both animal welfare and effective wildlife management. Coordination already occurs on the ground. It's also important to recognize the planning and coordination that already exists in many areas. On the North Coast, before the damage season begins, landowners, department staff, OSP meet to coordinate logistics, including salvage procedures, designated meat processors, and how overall response process will work once trapping activity begins. That kind of advanced coordination is valuable. It helps ensure that everyone understands their responsibilities and that the response can occur efficiently and lawfully when an animal is captured. So where does this leave us? For me, this only comes down to finding the right balance. I believe we have a responsibility to establish a clear standard that protects the welfare of the animals that are captured. At the same time, I think it's important that we recognize the legitimate concerns of landowners and trappers who are dealing with real-world situations, particularly the statutory requirements associated with salvaging a bear. I don't believe anyone involved in this discussion wants an animal to remain unnecessarily in a trap. The differences are primarily about what standard is both appropriate and achievable under actual conditions. I appreciate the fact that staff brought the different interests together and listened to their concerns. I also appreciate the 439 members of the public who took time to provide comments. Those perspectives deserve to be taken seriously, even when they lead us to a different conclusion. Ultimately, I believe our responsibility as a commission is to consider all these perspectives carefully and determine what standard best practices animal welfare is best for animal welfare while remaining practical, enforceable, and consistent with Oregon law. I'm very interested in hearing the perspective of other commissioners as we consider where this balance can be struck.
Thank you, Commissioner Labhart. Commissioner Haldefreeze and Morrison, do either of you have sense of the commission comments or want to make any comment? And if not, then I'll go to one from myself since I'm.
I'll pipe in, Chair Wall, I guess. I think Commissioner Lockhart summarized it very well. I think it is a balancing act of nobody wants animals to be in traps longer than they need to be, but what is logistically possible out there. I think I appreciate staff bringing in all the groups, listening. Brian obviously has thought a lot about this, and I think kind of that balancing act has been struck, in my opinion.
Thank you. Commissioner Morrison.
Yeah, I guess I would echo a lot of what Commissioner Haldefreeze had to say. I will say I struggle a lot with, I put a lot of weight behind the AWFL guidelines and knowing that those guidelines are around 24 hours, it does seem like a big additional step to go to 56. I mean, again, as we've heard from a lot of people commenting today, 48 folks can largely get behind, but that additional increment of time is just, I guess, a little bit harder to get fully behind. That said, I want to come back to what Commissioner Haldefreeze said and really emphasize. I know that everyone that's involved in this has respect for the animals that are being affected by trapping activity and wants to do right by them. So I just want to get that comment out there, and I appreciate that from everyone involved.
Thank you. A couple things I want to mention. I appreciate very much that we have this in front of us and that we are addressing this issue. I also appreciate that the emphasis on consuming the meat if we can, and also I think that at least from what I have heard, the timber industry is also interested in that, in making sure that the meat gets consumed, which is great. I think that this one comes down for me to it's a very it's really important to look at, I think, the animal welfare piece of this, and the meat consumption applies to bears. We're talking about bears and cougars, so it's maybe not the biggest deal in the world, but it is an issue because it narrows the field of why we would consider 56. I have confidence that the trappers could figure out a way to solve this at 48 hours, and the justification isn't enough as I look at it to mean that we should go to 56. So I come down on that side of it, that we really need to, and consistency, it keeps coming up in the big game rules and that sort of thing. And we've made a big deal about trying to be consistent. That one's not quite as big a deal to me as the arguments for the extra hours. I think they don't justify that change to the animal welfare. In this case, I think 48 hours is where to land. So that's where I come down on it, but it's just how I read it. So let's move to a motion on this one. We've heard from everybody, I think, who wanted to see anything else about the consensus. So
I mean, I'm more than happy to make a motion, and then Pastor Feld, we can go from there.
mhm.
Okay, I move the administrative rule establishing trap check requirements for bear and cougar trapping as proposed by staff and shown in attachment 3.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to adopt the administrative rules establishing trap check requirements for bear and cougar trapping as proposed by staff and shown in attachment 3. Let's do a voice vote on this one if we could, Michelle.
Holly Freeze,
Yes.
O'Dall,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Labhart,
Yes.
Spellring,
Yes.
Hatfield Hyde. Yes. Wall.
Oh, motion carries. Thank you to staff, to commissioners for the discussion, and of course to the people who testified and worked on this for months. So thank you. Let's move on to item D. And could you come back up, Sarah? And we'll go to Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund Wildlife Crossing. And Reba. Sorry to leave you off.
Bring us something positive.
Got you. It's at the base of the green button. Make sure it's.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Director Colbert, members of the commission. Thank you for the time to speak today on behalf of the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund. I am Reva Gilman, the OCF Grant Coordinator. With me is Rachel Wheat, Wildlife Connectivity Coordinator, Sarah Wright, Habitat Division Administrator. Today, the Advisory Committee is seeking Commission approval to fund a wildlife crossing project for $3.9 million. First, I'll go over the source of the wildlife connectivity funds. Clicker. So last year, the OCF received $5 million in proceeds from the May 2025 lottery revenue bond sale. These funds were allocated by the 2023 legislature in House Bill 5030 for the purposes of supporting wildlife mobility and habitat connectivity projects in priority connectivity areas. These eligible projects must include construction or significant improvement of a wildlife crossing infrastructure on a roadway such as a bridge, culvert, overpass, or tunnel. To date, the commission has approved $1,069,500 of the Wildlife Passage Lottery revenue bonds to 3 projects. At their July 7th public meeting, the OSERF Advisory Committee recommended the approval of $3.9 million in expenditure from the OSERF Wildlife Connectivity Funds to support the Trans-Pacific Parkway Wildlife Crossing project. Now I'll hand it over to Rachel Wheat, who will be going into more depth on the recommended project.
Good afternoon, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Rachel Wheat. I am the Wildlife Connectivity Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm going to be giving some background information on what we're calling the Trans-Pacific Parkway Wildlife Crossing Project. The site of the proposed effort is within Coos County on a roadway called the Trans-Pacific Parkway. It is a county-maintained roadway owned and operated by Coos County, and it runs from US 101 out down the North Coos Bay Spit to a property owned by the Port of Coos Bay. It is a major collector roadway with significant traffic, estimated truck traffic every 6 minutes on average, 24/7, 365 days a year. This is largely timber transport from some timber facilities on the North Spit. And there's also potential for significant development along the North Coos Bay Spit, which would increase traffic volumes over time. So at this current moment in time, Coos County is evaluating the entire extent of the Trans-Pacific Parkway, looking to do a major road renovation effort, which is going to include things like lane widening and addition of turning lanes. So this represents a really good opportunity for us to implement some wildlife crossing structures along this stretch of roadway. We are interested in the site in particular for the coastal Pacific martin, also known as Humboldt martin, which is a state and federally threatened species. And we have significant martin mortality along this stretch of roadway. We've had 4 martin mortalities in about a 1-mile stretch of the Trans-Pacific Parkway in the last 7 years. Now, 4 mortalities may sound like a small number compared to something like northern red-legged frogs or deer, where we're seeing hundreds of mortalities, but we have maybe 30 individuals in the subpopulation south of the Umpqua River. So every one of those mortalities is significant for the species and drives the species closer to extinction. The funding request here is for $3.9 million that would be used to implement new crossing structures on the Trans-Pacific Parkway as part of the overall Trans-Pacific Parkway road renovation effort. We are proposing at least 3 new small wildlife animal crossings. These would be about 2 foot in diameter and would provide dry passage for wildlife. We know from studies of martin elsewhere in North America and elsewhere in the world that they, like most of our wildlife species, don't like to get their feet wet. So these would be dry passage structures. We're also proposing replacement of existing stream conveyance culvert with a larger structure, either potentially a 16-foot wide by 10-foot high box culvert or bridge that would allow dry passage benches on either side of the stream that would permit wildlife passage. And that structure would be large enough to pass potentially as large as black-tailed deer. In addition to these wildlife crossing structures, we would be building directional walls along 1 mile of roadway that would help funnel wildlife to the entrances of these new crossing structures. This project also has excellent alignment with our departmental priorities. So coastal Pacific martin is a species of greatest conservation need in Oregon. As I mentioned before, it is both state and federally threatened. It's one of the top 5 priority species in the Oregon Coast Range ecoregion. This also addresses one of our State Wildlife Action Plan key conservation issues, barriers to animal movement, specifically Goal 2 Action 2.3, to work with our transportation departments to help mitigate for transportation impacts on our wildlife species. The project is located within a priority wildlife connectivity area. It's also located within a conservation opportunity area. And most importantly, it meets all of the criteria that we're required to meet to spend those lottery bond dollars. The timeline here, assuming that funding is approved, we will move forward into contracting with Coos County to get that funding over to them. We anticipate that contract will be complete sometime the end of September, beginning of October. We will move directly into engineering design for these structures. We're hoping to go out to bid for this project sometime next spring, with construction happening next summer, potentially next fall, and the construction would be complete by that spring 2028 deadline for spending of that lottery bond revenue. And just for fun here, the image on the screen is a long-tailed weasel that we captured using the Polensky crossing structure, which is another project that was funded by this lottery bond revenue, for which we've seen great success.
Staff recommendation is to approve the selected project totaling 3.9 million as recommended by the Conservation Recreation Advisory Committee. With the funding of this project, OCRF will continue to promote wildlife connectivity and conservation. I'd like to thank all of you for your time and of course the OCRF Advisory Committee and chairs for their continued dedication to the program. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
We do happen to have a couple questions. Commissioner Labhart, I think yours was first, then Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, and then Commissioner Moldal.
Okay, thanks, Chair. We've had trouble with this House Bill 5030 and the lottery revenue bonds to trying to find projects that meet the criteria for, and Rachel, you said it meets all the criteria. Well, thank God. It's just frustrating. I wish we'd have done a better job, in my opinion, of talking to legislators into giving us a little more flexibility with this $5 million bond, because it's amazing that they gave us $5 million for connectivity, but we've had difficulty trying to find projects that, so thank you for all the good work to find one that fits.
Chair Wall, Commissioner Labhart, if I could just quickly respond to that and say that a lot of credit for the long search and finding of this project does go to Rachel. And she worked really hard and beat all the bushes around the state to try and find projects that met all the criteria. And so just want to acknowledge your work and a great job in finding this project and one that does have such conservation significance.
Vice Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, guys, for bringing this, and may this be one of just hundreds of these that will come in Oregon in different ways with funding, because we all know how much we need this kind of thing. Good point. Thank you. Commissioner Moldal.
Hey, Ibid, yes, and I would love to see hundreds, thousands. This is so exciting. I realize the crystal ball and future land use is very foggy, but on the third slide, the Google Earth view of the land use, land ownership, could you expound on what this land on both sides is zoned for? What's it going to look like? Do we know 20 years from now who owns it? This is laudable on its surface, but I'd love to know what's going to happen to the land.
Chair Wall, Commissioner Moldal. Yeah, so the land west of the Trans-Pacific Parkway is owned by the Bureau of Land Management. So that is under permanent protection. Obviously, there's continually shifting land use policies within some of our federal partners, but we anticipate that land will remain under BLM ownership. The land east of the Trans-Pacific Parkway in the project site is owned by the Port of Coos Bay. Much of it, however, is wetland habitat. So it's going to be more difficult for them to develop in that particular parcel than some other land on the Coos Bay Spit. So there's always the potential that they could see development in that area. However, given that it is wetland, that's going to raise some difficulties just in general. They'll have to go through some much more strict permitting policies there.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. I don't think the other two commissioners online have their hands up, but I did want to mention a couple things. I appreciate this one. I drive by that Trans-Pacific Parkway every time I leave the South Coast, and you're right about the trucks. I appreciate that we found one for the Martins, and it's follow up to in a way to work that we did earlier when we were considering how to try to protect the Martins. And this one seems like a great idea. So thank you for all the work on searching it out. I look forward to this one going in. So let's move to a motion if we could. And Commissioner Moldal, you look like you're reaching for the motion.
I move to approve expenditure from the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund of up to $3.9 million for the Trans-Pacific Parkway Wildlife Crossing Project.
I'm second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve expenditure from the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund as was just read into the record. Michelle, could we do a voice one on the, yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Labhart,
Yes.
Spellbrink,
Yes.
Paul DeFreeze,
Yes.
Modal,
Yes.
Hatfield Hyde,
Yes.
Wall.
Yes. Thank you all for that one and for giving us a note to end on for today. Thank you very much. We are adjourned unless anyone has anything else, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you, commissioners, again for helping us to celebrate and for pitching in on the presentations. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, see you